Karyl Evans is a documentarian for over 30 years. She's won 6 Emmys. She's won national awards. Won local awards. An incredible film history. We talk about some of my favorites that she made. We talk about uh, she's from Connecticut, and we talk about Civil War in Connecticut, Civil War to civil rights that Ozzie Davis narrated. Letters from Italy, another great film. Wait to hear about this. These two sisters. Their father was a medic from Yale, and he came back with PTSD, and they created this opera. And what happened there, by the way, teaser, Meryl Streep narrates this. Incredible film history about uh, uh, American. An American tribe here, Native American tribe in Connecticut, and how they came to two sisters, what they did, suffrage as well, another film. This other woman, Mabel Osgood. We talk about discipline, of course, and how she interprets it in her filmmaking, art versus science. A great conversation with Karyl Evans. Go visit her. Karyl is spelled Karyl, evansproductions.com. We'll put it in the show notes, but a great conversation. I know you're going to love it. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business? And it lasted over 25 years. Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Well, thanks for doing this. I'm excited
Sure.
to talk about some of the work that I've seen. Do you consider yourself a documentarian?
Oh, yes. I'm definitely a documentary filmmaker, and it's a little different genre from many other kinds of filmmaking that I've done and experienced. So I know documentary filmmaking, I was meant to do it.
I mean, there's just been an explosion of documentaries in the last couple of years. I mean, is it a good time to be a documentarian?
Oh, I think so. I think people are really interested in seeing the way other people, live and what they think and slices of life that you don't have any idea about. And, it's really true that real stories are more interesting often than,
Mm,
feature films because you can't believe it's really true. And that might be with the Tiger King. No one could believe that was true.
right,
And then you have the one about the triplets. You
right.
couldn't believe that, they never knew each other and then they all came together and they found each other. So I think it's just very interesting.
It's true because with fiction, you're supposed to suspend, disbelief. You're supposed to, just kind of fall into it. But with a documentary, it's, nonfiction. And you just mentioned Tiger King. I just wrote down a few that I've watched over the last year or so: the QAnon, the Vow, Alan Farrow, the Jinx, the Bee Gees. The whole music documentary is just a whole another area, I would think. Octopus Garden, which won an Oscar.
My octopus teacher.
My Octopus Teacher. See, Octopus Garden is a
Yes.
Beatles song.
Okay.
Octopus Teacher.
Yeah, that was a really good documentary.
Wonderful.
Yeah, yeah,
Wonderful. Oh,
yeah,
that in South Africa there. Yeah, that was
yeah.
absolutely wonderful. Oh,
Really was.
the dedication to that was, and then even the whole kind of, I mentioned, I just wrote down like Anthony Bourdain. God rest his soul, but just like
Yeah.
his cooking and his travels, that was all documentary as well.
Yes. And so all of most of what you're describing is you're finding out the inside story of what someone went through.
Mm,
And, for instance, my octopus teacher, when would you go underwater diving with someone for a year? I mean, and then it's
right.
all collapsed for you. So in a less than 2 hours, you get to experience someone's life in a year's time. I think one of the most important parts about it is it's better if there's some kind of story arc
Mm.
so that the person starts one place and then finishes in another place. And that's why documentaries are so satisfying if they're made, in that type of way, that you feel like you're really following somebody's trajectory.
Very, very true. Now, I thought I heard this. I tried to do a little more research on it, but it looks like Amazon has cut back on the documentaries because they're afraid of liability and lawsuits.
I had not heard that.
Yeah, I definitely I was listening to something recently and I thought I heard that, but is there a liability issue with documentaries? I would assume there'd be some, if there's the natural nonfiction, format may lend itself perhaps to some credibility, perhaps?
Well, as I say to everyone, I'm not an entertainment lawyer.
Mm,
So there are a lot of legal issues with documentaries because you are looking, say, if you do social documentaries, you're looking at other people's lives. So I'm always very careful that I am including that person in, the rights issues,
mm.
getting release forms and making sure that they know what it's being used for and what type of documentary, and that it's okay to use the footage in other ways as well, so that right up front people know what's going to happen. I think that comes into play where there could be some liability issues when you don't go through that kind
Mm.
of more legal formal procedure, and maybe you're just trying to get somebody's story without really asking permission.
Yeah, the lawyers have to get involved, don't they, with everything?
Oh.
Is Ken Burns the grandfather of the documentary?
Oh yeah, Ken Burns. He certainly is. I think it's because he's the one with his Civil War series back in 890, I believe it was 1990 or 91. He came out with that series and made it so accessible
Mm,
to millions and millions of people. And a lot of people always thought, oh, documentaries are so dry. And yet he made a subject that's, educational and interesting and historical, really interesting by bringing out personal stories. And he did it in such a intelligent, well researched, artistic way. So he certainly is the grandfather. I'm sitting in front of my edit computer right now. And in Final Cut Pro 10, it's the Ken Burns effect. So once you get your name on, Final Cut Pro software, you're pretty much the grandfather.
it's so funny you say that. My daughter is a senior at Cal State, and she's majoring in animation,
Oh,
and I mentioned that I was watching Ken Burns' Muhammad, his latest,
oh yeah,
documentary, which is wonderful,
yeah.
and she said, "Oh, we just learned about his effect," and I said, "Yeah, yeah, that's
Exactly.
that's, yeah, it's just and baseball, that baseball one he did was
Oh,
incredible.
jazz, country
Jazz,
music. Yeah,
yes.
beautifully
Yeah.
done.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And, I mean, Carol, you're so well decorated, 6 Emmys. I mean, I've never talked to anyone who's won 6 Emmys before. This is wonderful. And I've watched some of them, the Rise and Fall, the Newgate Prison, the African Americans in Connecticut, the Civil War rights. I know you did this a while ago. Ozzie Davis,
Yes.
what was that like? What a wonderful man.
Oh, it was just incredible. Just the brief history is that I had done a film on the Amistad, and so
Mm,
I became very interested in African American history, having grown up in Connecticut and never have heard about the Amistad case.
hmm.
So then I wrote a grant to do the African American Freedom Trail, got the grant, and so I did a short film, which I got an Emmy for. And then I thought, this is such good material. I mean, this is the most important history I never knew.
Mm.
So then I went to the Connecticut Humanities Council and got the money to do these 2 1-hour The History of African Americans in Connecticut. At the same time, I was invited to Carnegie Hall, and it was a celebration of Paul Robeson. Who were the people who got the biggest applause were Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee.
His
And I
wife.
said, those are going to be my, interview, my voiceover, if they'll do it for me. So they both said yes immediately, didn't charge me a dime, came on their own dime. They could not have been lovelier. So so Ozzie Davis narrates the first, the colonial times to Civil War, and then Ruby Dee narrates Civil War to Civil Rights.
Yeah, his voice is
Oh.
so as soon as I heard, I said that, and I was introduced to him late. I didn't know any of his early, Do the Right Thing with Spike Lee. It was in 1989. Him and his wife played in it, and that's how I was introduced. And then I went back and saw some of his films. But that the whole, I mean, I grew up in Connecticut too, like yourself, and just the Canterbury School and James T. Smith and the whole Amistad just happening right there in Long Island Sound in New Haven, which I'm there quite frequently. It's just incredible.
Yes, and I actually did the Amistad in 1995, and before Spielberg.
Right.
So I got a call from the office, Spielberg's office, to say, "Ooh, we're interested. We've seen your documentary. Would like to do this film. Would you like to come to the set?" And which was this whole experience in itself. But that's when the world then knew about the
Right.
Amistad. It wasn't until Steven Spielberg made a film about it, which I was so thrilled about. And then 2 nights ago, my films were being screened for the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame. And there was the Amistad at port on the Connecticut River in Hartford. And I thought, it's ubiquitous now, the Amistad ship. It's right there. Everybody knew what it was about.
Very cool. Please tell me what it was like on the set, Steven Spielberg Amistad.
Yeah, so there he was working, and it was, surreal because I, started out in San Diego and then went to Los Angeles. And, if you're a director, to see Steven Spielberg work is incredible. So he was doing this scene with Anthony Hopkins, and meeting Steven Spielberg was fantastic. I also had a situation where I was on the ship being used
Oh,
out at sea, and I was offered the chance to go at the mast, which I did, and so I went all the way up to the top, and there was a whole thing with that, and then. But the real part that I really still remember and can smile about is it was Anthony Hopkins. He was doing Supreme Court scene, and he finished his big monologue, and he got applause from the crew. We were on a sound stage, and he came right over to me and he kissed me on the lips. And I said to somebody next to me, "What was that about?" "Oh, it's his last scene, so he's probably celebrating." And so anyway, I can say I was kissed by Anthony Hopkins.
wow. What a
Yeah.
great story. He is just an incredible the movie that did he win the Oscar? I think he did. He didn't even show up. The one they just did when he had Alzheimer's. I didn't want to
Right.
spoil it.
Yeah. Oh, so yeah, that film was excellent. Yeah.
S-
My Father,
My Father, that's
I
it.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, The Father,
Yeah.
My Father,
So good.
yeah.
Yeah. The
Yeah,
Father. Yeah.
what a tremendous
Oh,
actor.
he was so good in that. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And the way we were kept as the viewing audience, out of the loop.
Right. Just the way he felt. I
Yes.
mean, that's brilliant filmmaking too.
Brilliant. Brilliant,
Brilliant.
because we did not know. We only knew what
We Right.
yeah, that was
Beautifully done.
so Steven Spielberg, what was I'm sure he watched your film. Did you give it any feedback?
The only feedback I needed to know was that I was invited to the set because they had
Understand.
seen my film. And, once you're invited to a set, you know that
Right.
people respected your work. And afterwards, apparently, well, I know because Yale sent me a letter that said something like Steven Spielberg would like to give us a showing of his film on Amistad, but we've decided we would rather show your documentary because it's accurate, which is kind of funny because That's kind of Yale in a way. You know, they wanted to be accurate,
Yeah.
and people at the time, do you remember there was a big uproar because they had used artistic license, which I've been in feature films, and that's
Mhm.
what you do.
Mhm.
And they had made the governor of our state like this ambulance chasing, lawyer. And people in Connecticut were not happy with the way the Puritans were pictured, and on and on and on. It wasn't accurate. So anyway, they showed my film instead.
What an honor. Yeah, their goal is to kinda sell tickets, yours is to kinda tell the truth in a compelling
Yeah,
manner.
right, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, so, yeah, that's the trade-off. Very, very interesting. The Letter from Italy was so great. You won an Emmy for that as well.
Yeah, I love doing that. This film is about two sisters who live in Connecticut. One's a composer and one's a poet, and the composer teaches at Wesleyan, and their father, who was a Yale medic, who was in World War II, comes back with PTSD, and it was in the time when they didn't really know, what was going on, and he eventually commits suicide. And the girls are just haunted by their father's death and by everything that unfolded. And here they're in their 70s, and they're writing a 2 hour oratorio about his entire life. So I felt really, honored to be even asked to help visualize what they had done. And it's a oratorio, so it's on the stage, and then I had to figure out, one, how to just document the making of it,
Hmm.
and then two, to also film it so that it would, also live as a film piece of art. Loved it. The music was incredible.
It really was, and your style of delivering this was just so remarkably and smooth, and, you could not keep your eyes off of it. I mean, the build up, and how you learn, and the pictures of their father, and the letters, and then meeting the actors that are gonna sing and play in this, like you say, in this performance, and then showing the performance, and then seeing the World War II, the his friends come and getting interviewed. It was just tremendous,
Oh,
tremendous film.
thank you. I just appreciate people like you who see the work and the artistry in it, because I love doing it. And I'm always so appreciative when people really see what goes into a film like that. So thank you.
Yeah, so, with a film like that, and even the one previously, I mean, how much do you have to, I think of the Italian sculptor, so he starts everything with a block, and he just takes away the bad parts, right? So, do you have is it similar? Are there hundreds of hours that you've gotta cut down, and how do you decide?
Yes. So, I have, just by being around people, so you can see that I would have to be very, well, okay, you can say nosy, but I actually care. I care about people. So
Hmm,
I'm finding out everything I can about them and what really is interesting about them. So often people want to like have something in particular told, but I'm really looking forward to the authentic part of them or what makes them interesting. And so after I interview them, and I've done all that work to figure that out ahead of time and tried to pull everything I can out, I put everything on the computer.
hmm,
And then I listen to their entire interview, and I pick out the best things that they said. Now, a lot of times on paper, you may think it's something else. But when you look at a person and they've got a tear in their eye, or they're clutching themselves, or there's something else visually that tells the story, it is a visual medium. So I want to make sure that visually it's telling a story, and also that their words are telling a story. And then as I do all the selects from everybody I interviewed, I realize in the editing what the real story is. Because it's not until you
hmm.
collect really everything, like in the history of Connecticut City's 1 hour documentary, I actually interviewed 100 people. So
Wow.
you listen, and what is great is if you do this for as long as I have, all 100 interviews stay in my head for me to be able to figure out what the story is.
Wow.
Now, when I first started, I had to get the transcripts and cut out the pages of what they said and build the actual story in written form. But now I've done it so much that I can just do it all in my head,
Hmm.
figure out what the story is. And then once you have your structure, the bones, then you start figuring out what are the natural sound bites where, what they say just proved what you were saying, that, oh, that they are very kind to the people they're working with, or they are a perfectionist because of something they say. And then you put in the B-roll, which is everything on top of it, that proves the point that they're saying in a visual form only. So they're talking, 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 and they're talking about how their mother had taken them to piano lessons. I asked them for a picture of them at a piano lesson,
Hmm.
because that really then takes the person on a journey. If you never see anything a person's talking about, for instance, this would be great if you could see clips of the films I'm doing and you say, oh,
Mm.
yeah, yeah. Oh, now I see. Now I see. So I try to do that with my films. And then I'm always trying to literally relate people who are watching to what it is the person's talking about.
Very interesting. So when you're having this conversation or this interview with them, are you thinking to yourself, "I'm gonna keep that, I'm not gonna keep that, I'm gonna" during the conversation?
Now I'm at the point where I can tell what will go in. I
Hmm.
might not know everything, but I'll say, oh my gosh, that is just perfect. It was so to the point I never thought they would say that, and or some ending statement. So, and sometimes I will keep pushing until I get something more emotional, because people tend to want to, yes, I really liked it, instead of, oh my gosh, it was the best thing I ever did and I can't believe I almost missed that. That's much more effective than,
Mm.
yes, I was really had a good time. So, push in a nice way. Like, I really, and I care about the people and I want them to, be as articulate and as gracious in front of the camera. So, I'll work with them until I feel like they're communicating in a way that will speak to more people.
Fascinating. By the way, Carol, bearing the lead, the narrator to that film was Meryl Streep.
Whew.
What was that
Yeah.
like?
Well, so again, when I left LA, I'd been in LA for 5 years and I worked in feature films and Showtime, and I worked in national PBS documentaries, Burt Lancaster, John Huston, on and on with the
Wow.
Jane Wyatt, on and on, who had Whoopi Goldberg. And I thought, oh, I'll never work with any Hollywood people. But I do know, since my Legacy of the Hollywood Blacklist film that I did, my first documentary in LA that was narrated by Burt Lancaster, that a celebrity narrator just brings one more piece that will help your film be promoted and people might see it.
Hmm.
And I did that with Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee, as you said. Then I did this with Paul Giamatti. I had him narrate my History of New Haven film. And then I said to the two sisters, it's not necessary, and I narrate myself. But
Yes.
what would be great is a narrator. Do you know any celebrity? And Sarah said, well, Meryl Streep. I went to college with her, and I was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? And I said, oh, we've got to try. We've got to try. So she immediately, within a week, had said yes. We did need to wait 6 months for her schedule to open.
Mm.
But it was incredible. And then there was this blizzard the day we were supposed to do this, and
Oh.
Meryl was going to come to New Haven, and everyone kept saying, "You're canceling, right?" And I'm like, "I'm not canceling." Has Meryl Streep canceled? No, I'm not canceling. I will not cancel. And she came in a blizzard, drove herself, walked in, ready to go. She was incredible.
Wow. Wow. I'm not quite sure what I would what's the first question you ask Meryl Streep? Just, "Here's the script?" I mean, what is that?
Oh, yeah. So, of course, I had sent her the script
Yeah.
earlier. I just said, let me hear how you sound. Do you remember her in the playing Eleanor Roosevelt
Oh,
in?
yes.
Yes. And so she spoke it very slowly. And she did the same with my script. And I
Hmm.
thought, uh-oh, my film is already too long. And I needed her to speak a little faster, because I knew if I let her speak at the speed she was speaking, that I would have to take out about 15 minutes of my film. I could just
Wow.
time it in my head.
Wow.
And so I said, just for me, could you just speed it up slightly? And it was terrible. And I said, do it exactly the way you want to. And she did a beautiful job. But I know, such a professional. She had done it that way. She had practiced it that way. She was comfortable that way. And I was not going to change what she wanted to do.
Yeah, I didn't notice her voice, the cadence being any slower than usual during it didn't
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't notice. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I didn't notice at all, but it's just one of those voices. And then, of course, you
Oh,
mentioned, just yeah, I mean, it's certainly Hollywood royalty, Meryl
yes,
Streep, you know?
absolutely.
Um, the 2 sisters, the Mashantucket Pequot sisters, and what a great story. I mean, living
Yes.
in Connecticut, we know about Ledger, we know about the casino and everything, and perhaps we hear different things about the origin, but having these 2 really opposite women rough it and what they went through, and it was excellent.
Thank
Excellent.
you. You're reminding me that it's my second film about two sisters, because these
Ah,
are two different sisters. What you're talking about is the two sisters that are Pequot, Mashantucket Pequot, and I had done a film about them for the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame. They were
sure.
being inducted 2 years ago, and so I grew up here and I knew nothing about any history of
Right.
Native American people in Connecticut. And, they've been here for 12,000 years.
Mm,
Why is it that we don't know anything about them? And I don't have any real statistics. It looks maybe there's 6,000 Native people in Connecticut. And I thought there's so much history here that I don't know. And I love doing this film about them. And so that's when I decided that, kind of like the Freedom Trail film, that there really had to be more of a film. So I applied for a grant to Connecticut Humanities, and I did get a planning grant to try to get a research document done about a history of Native Americans in Connecticut. And we have 4 of the 5 tribes so far that are very involved, and we're interviewing them, and we've actually interviewed them and done transcripts, and they're part of the project. They're our community partners.
I mean, the way the state took the land over, and then there was a federal
Mhm.
lawsuit with Ronald Reagan, and he signed it, and, it's just the incredible story of what they went through. They just lived on the land, there was no electricity there, and then they wanted to fix their roof, but the government said you can't, and, it's just, oh my goodness,
Right, and nobody knows that history.
no,
We were doing the same thing, treating them just as badly as anywhere else in the country, and like nobody knows that. They just think, oh, they're so rich and they have
that's
casinos, and
right,
it's, oh my gosh, you know what they went through?
to
I
get
mean,
there.
it's been very, very difficult, and it still is.
Yeah, '86 is when they had the first kind of bingo hall, and now, of course, it's a beautiful,
Yeah,
it's, absolutely beautiful now, but that's, 30 or 40 years ago, and,
yeah.
you mentioned Native Americans, and when in Connecticut, when I have, friends come over, they ask me what Connecticut means, and I say, "Well, it's Native American for where the river ends. The Connecticut River ends here." That's the only history until your film that I knew about the Native Americans here in Southern New England.
That's great. Well, that's what I'm hoping, is that we have a lot more understanding and knowledge and respect, for what has come before.
And then leading right from the 2 sisters there, we go into suffrage and, how suffrage happened in Connecticut, and
Right,
the 19th Amendment was 1920.
right,
I mean, it's absolutely crazy. I mean, that's World War One,
right.
and that actually kind of your film kind of that aided it because many of the men went overseas and just what happened and Katharine Hepburn got involved here in Connecticut. It was again, your films just have a way of a subject that I don't know if I'd be interested. I have 2 daughters, I've raised by women, but I don't know anything about this, and it's just I can't keep my eyes off of it, and it's over, and I said, "How long have I been watching? That was incredible." It goes by in a moment.
Oh, great. Well, it's another one of those stories that I'm again from Connecticut and a
Yeah,
woman, and I didn't know that history.
yeah,
And what I like about documentaries as a medium is that it's not a textbook. So you can very enjoyably, easily get a good overview of a subject and see the visuals, and it really comes to life between the visuals, the sound effects, the movies,
Hmm.
the movement and the visuals, the voiceover, the music. To me, it just brings it so to life that it when you said it was over in a minute, that's because it's very entertaining as you're learning. And that's what I love about documentary filmmaking, is that you're learning something, but you're very entertained at the same
Hmm.
time. So that's always my goal, is to do that and to really inspire people, either to learn more about the subject or to be able to talk about it a little bit more knowledgeably. I mean, I really like that part. So I really consider myself a filmmaker, but also an educator.
What a fine balance that is. Yeah, education and, entertainment and education.
Yeah.
Um, and did you have a lot I mean, where do you find the source for that? Is that again, a lot of cutting down, you know what you're going to take there?
Well, usually I'm working with a partner that, has also some interest. So again, that was the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame. Their theme last
Right.
year was 100 years. And so they had done maybe a year's worth of research on this particular subject. So I was lucky there that there was actually some documentation about the history of women's suffrage in Connecticut. And so I'm able to use that and then, talk to scholars and get, make sure it's accurate and get the scholar's point of view, and then get, people who have lived it and breathed it. And so it's a kind of a combination. The visuals can be, challenging because,
Mm,
especially, women, there wasn't a lot of documentation of women. And that's why one of the reasons I do this is because I don't think women have been properly documented. And, I found this out when I was doing the history of the Grove Street Cemetery. It just says, and wife. And there's no name, birth dates. And I realized, women aren't really given any kind of historical, there's no historical record. So you have to just work harder. It's usually easy to do histories of men, especially prominent men,
hmm.
and then, if they're prominent women, sometimes there are images. And then you go to a second layer, and then you go to anyone in a minority, and it gets harder and harder and harder. But I just think it's so important. Like, for instance, I just found out that the Mohegans commissioned 102 illustrations of Mohegans by an artist. And so, it's a lot of research finding these things out. So
Hmm.
now I'm going to have a visual source when I actually do that story. For Amistad, I hired an illustrator to do the illustrations of the Amistad captives in jail,
Hmm.
because, of course, I'm not going to have that image. So it's constantly trying to be
Wow.
creative to figure out, how do I tell this story so that it can come to life for people.
And when you have that image, you gotta use that Ken Burns effect.
Right, right. Right. So those are like going in to make sure you're seeing, the fact that he's got his arm around the waist,
Mm.
or the fact that they're standing way far, apart from each other. You're trying to communicate something else by where you go into and maybe where you come out. Like, it's the end of the story and this is what you have now. So there's all kinds of reasons that you're coming into something or pulling out of something.
Hmm. And, when you get commission, you mentioned going and finding grants. When the women's group comes to you for this, do they say, "We want a movie on women's suffrage, do it," or do they just kind of give you a framework? Like how's that presented to you?
Yeah, so commissions are usually pretty particular.
Hmm.
So I've been doing the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame induction films for 15 years.
Hmm.
And I, am do it I don't want to say it's a formula, but what I have found is people want to know a person's entire life. They don't just want a few little sound bites like this year, like Kika Matos, who's a social justice leader. They want to know, where did she come from? Oh,
Hmm.
she was born in Trinidad. She lived in Tobago. Her father would work for the UN. Her mother was a teacher. Then you see how a person, came up in the world. So I like to do their entire history. That's kind of prescribed. It's the films that I do on my own, like this, the Freedom Trail, that was informed by a pamphlet that I saw and that was about the sites on the Freedom Trail. And then I have to bring those stories to life.
Hmm.
This one about a history of Indigenous people in Connecticut is really going to come from Indigenous people in Connecticut. I will completely take their cue. And, we're involving as many Native people as we can in Connecticut to be the artists and, the filmmakers and producers and voiceover and music. But basically, you're trying to give voice to somebody else, is what you're trying to do. So that's what I try to do, is involve, like the history of African Americans was not written by me. That was written by an African American scholar, Frank Mitchell, and Jeremy Brecker, who's a longtime labor, uh, scholar.
Very interesting. And do they get final proof before you go live?
So basically, I usually set it up. If if it's a consignment, I'm sorry, a commission. If it's a commission, I do a rough cut, and they get to see it and make any changes. I take their changes, I do a fine cut, and then they get that final approval. If it's really my film, even Letters from Italy, I get the final decision,
Mm,
and I have the copyright on it. It's like, to me, it really is a work of art, and all of those tiny little decisions. It's like a painter. You can't really have someone telling you to do the cloud differently because they like it puffier looking. Really, yes, if anything's inaccurate, I will change it. But artistically, that's what you are. You're being hired because of your aesthetic sense and your artistry and your sense of composition and your understanding of music and how it flows with your sound bites and your sound effects. So if they're hiring me, they want what I bring to the table. So really, in the end, I don't think I've had anybody say, "Oh, you changed that," or "I'm not going to show it." I've
mm.
never had anybody say that. So I do feel lucky. I like to collaborate. I'm all there for what people want to show their particular audience. So I'm working with them in every way I can. But there's just some conventions or standards that I have. Like, I'm not going to do the whole thing with a shaky camera unless it's a ghost story, but I don't really do ghost stories. I want it to look professional. And, so that I do have a standard that I always adhere to.
The films are incredibly professional. I guess that was my next question. Has there ever been a conflict, a clash where, hey, don't show this part of this history? Some of that commission you, did they ever do that where they tried to remove some of your artistic freedom?
No, I was just thinking about that. There was, because somebody just assumed that, I would be stopped. And I said, they didn't have me change one thing.
Hmm.
And I'm trying to remember what it was. But basically, I'm so, the dignity of each person I interview is so important to me
Mm,
that I'm not going to put in anything. I don't do that kind of film where it's going to really put somebody in a really awkward, difficult place. I really want people coming out, being the dignified people they are and being respected for what they bring to the story. I'm not there to be salacious or to try to, in any way disrespect anyone. So there wouldn't be really a chance for me. People often say, "Oh, I'm so worried about that." And I say, I make everyone look good in my films. I'm not going to change the truth. And I may leave something out where you looked really ridiculous, but, you're going to be fine in my film.
have you ever had an issue where you had to question you mentioned dignity, but just their credibility after talking with them?
Boy, have you?
Yes.
See, I haven't had that. I think that's very interesting. If I came up, because I've interviewed several thousand people,
Mm,
I would just leave that person out if I did have a question, and maybe I have, or I can't think of someone right now, but I just wouldn't put somebody in if I felt like it was not, legitimate or not okay, because I usually, I'll say, over interview. I have plenty of interviews, and I
mm.
don't need one person to make my film. So, and I do tend to get to know people ahead of time, so that I feel good about it, especially if it's my own project. If it's a commission, that's harder because then I have to work with people who have been selected. And if the person's been selected and it's for commission and I'm doing a film about them, then I work with what I have. And they'll kind of say, they kind of prove whatever the point is themselves, that maybe they aren't as serious about what they should be or whatever, or their friends not really having much to say about them, and I don't have to really say or do anything. It proves itself in the end.
Very interesting. How much of your process is art versus science?
That's a great question. It's funny. Somebody just said to me, uh, "Oh, what you do is a trade," and I was like,
Hmm.
"Okay, well, wait."
Hmm.
I wrote a long article about filmmaking being an art form, so I really do feel strongly. I wrote like a 20-page, 10,000 word article about
Wow.
the fact that filmmaking is an art form. And so many, it's so, people see TV every day and they think it's just so easy. But it's, really creating a film is not easy. And it is an art if you do it right. Now, what is kind of cool, and I love this about documentary, you have to know a lot about science and technology.
Hmm.
So I have to understand cameras and lights, and I have to understand, everything about the computer and all about the editing because I write, direct, produce, and I edit everything. So technology is a big part of it, and I think editing could be my favorite thing.
Hmm.
So to me, it's a perfect blend. But I do want to say I really strongly believe it is an art form because if you're working with music and sound and actors, you don't call a feature film a trade,
Hmm.
because you're the creator. You're creating a piece of art.
That's very interesting. So a trade would be something that's completely scientific. There wouldn't be any room for kind of artist. I guess I never thought of that.
Yeah, well, when you said a trade, you think of a plumber and
Right.
electrician.
Right.
So, and that's, but that to me isn't a filmmaker, isn't really a trade
Hmm.
because although I'm sure there's creativity and
Hmm.
everything,
Hmm.
you know, I guess it would be the difference in painting a house and painting a fine piece of art. And
Hmm.
so a filmmaker is painting a fine piece of art, and a house painter is, just painting, the house. So I guess nothing wrong with doing trades. In fact, I count on people who do trade work in a way. Maybe, you could say, the craft service person, and, there's other people that help on a film set. But I think filmmaking is an art form.
We talk a lot about discipline on the show, on the podcast. I lost a lot of weight. People ask me how I lost it. I say discipline. How much of what you do, needs discipline, self discipline, etc.?
That's why I accepted this interview.
Is it?
I loved the whole premise of what you do because it is really what I think has made me successful in a 30 plus year career. I am extremely disciplined
Hmm.
because I have the organization part of my brain that keeps, a film set organized, my projects organized, things are organized. I'm very disciplined. Like on a Monday, I could no more go shopping on a Monday because on Monday, I start working and
Hmm.
I work all week long, 10 or 12 or whatever it takes. I, sometimes work on Saturdays. I try not to work on Sundays, but I'm extremely disciplined. And that comes up especially with the editing because I don't know if do you edit your own
I
pieces?
don't.
Okay, so the editing is this tedious,
Mm.
it just takes forever. It can be tedious. It
Mm.
doesn't have to be tedious, but parts of it are tedious. So if you didn't have a lot of discipline, I don't know how you could edit your own films. It's just you have to just be convinced that discipline is what keeps you being as productive as you are. And so that I am convinced of that, and I have done a lot of work in my career. So I'm convinced of discipline being important.
That's a great quote. But we might use it in the future. Thank you very much. And you talked about narration. You get other people to do it, people to illustrate. Your music as well. We have a mutual friend in Mr. Tom Izzo. I saw that he's done some of your music as well.
Yes, he is
He
fantastic and
is.
so good to work with. If I get any kind of budget, I am get so happy if I can hire a composer. And that's
Mhm.
what happened on this latest project about Mabel Osgood Wright,
Yes.
who's the founder of the Connecticut Audubon Society. And there was just enough room in the budget that I said, oh my gosh, I can hire Tom. Because what the composer does is they just bring this whole other element to your vision because they
Mm,
know instrumentation, like maybe they
mm,
can use a piccolo or a flute to sound like a bird in one section when you're talking about how important birds were to her. And it's all the layers that they can layer on that you didn't even think of. And I give them little hints like, oh, it's inspiring, or oh, I want
mm.
it to sound historic, or whatever. And then he has to just create it out of his mind, which to me is, talk about an art form. That's an art form. So that's that. So he's the composer of my newest film on Mabel Osgood Wright.
Yeah, I watched that and I don't know, Carol, I don't know anything about birds. I see them. I was a pilot for a little while, so I guess I have something in common, but, I mean, and then I just found myself just kinda swaying a bit. And I'm saying, "That's the piano. There's a piano in there. Look what it's doing to me." And,
Yeah,
and this woman, incredible woman with 30 books and,
yeah,
she had friends over there in the Museum history, a history of natural museum in New York City, and, uh, incredible film, and the music is just takes me along the way. And so, do you show Tom or whoever is the film without it? Like, you just said
yes.
you give him some adjectives to describe?
Yeah, I've got to have the film done because I don't think you can do the score without the film. You
Mm,
really have to see what
mm,
it is you're talking about. So I really, so yes, he gets some kind of a cut, and it's not usually the finished cut. So the whole timing issue becomes an issue because
mm.
you end up cutting out a minute out of the scene, and he's already written the minute into the final part of the music. So yes, so he sees the film, and we decide on what chunks need to have music because I don't like wall to wall music. So we kind of talk about which sections really could use some
Mm.
music. And I tend not to like a music right underneath an interview. I like an interview to kind of stand on its own if possible, and then to use music when you see montages of images,
Mm.
as it can be. It's not a hard and fast rule, but I think that tends to work better. And he's just so Tom Izzo is so lovely in that, we'll try things and it doesn't work and he's fine with it. It helps when I hope I don't have a big ego. He doesn't. And so you're willing to let things go, or I'm just willing to go with what he thinks is best, and we kind of work it through.
Yeah, I've known him for a while. I wish I knew him a little bit better, but he made the introduction. But yeah, he made the music for our podcast here, by the way. And
Oh, great.
yeah, and yeah, just incredible. He's going to come out with an album soon. But yeah, the music aspect of documentation, it's just I love the way, and you narrate that one as well.
Yes. Yeah, so I will say it's more about budget when maybe I got the music and then I
Mm,
narrated, but I always check with the client. I say, "Do you like this, sound of the narration?"
mm,
Love it, love it. So when they're fine with it and I don't have to pay that money to a narrator, then I think, "Oh, I get to hire a composer
hmm.
and I can put the money in for an original score." So I narrate when I need to, basically. I'd rather hire somebody, but I'm perfectly capable of doing it. And what happens is it does allow me a lot of flexibility. So if I want to change a scene, once Meryl Streep recorded, that
Mm,
was it. I
mm,
never changed the film again. But if I record it, I can re-record and keep changing the film. So it gives me a little flexibility.
mm.
Although, of course, I'd rather use a trained voiceover talent.
Very interesting. I hear that often with, authors of books, whether they should hire somebody to do the, Audible. I listen to a lot of books, and whether they should do it themselves or hire an actor. I guess there's pros and cons for each side. So what's next? What's next for you? What are you working on now?
So I am writing an NEH grant for the history of Native Americans in Connecticut, because documentaries take a lot of money.
Mm.
So that's a year process. In the meantime, I'm now working on a film with another producer director, Agnish Mochi, about a particle accelerator that's about to open at a national lab at Michigan State University. And Agnes is a physicist, and it's her film, but I'm her producing partner. So it will be a national film about this, 12 years in the making opening of this particle accelerator that will bring us to the point of the second after the Big Bang, which is her specialty. So it will be all about the science. She's a filmmaker, so it will be all about the art. And we were just on the phone just before I jumped on here to talk about all the locations and the music. We were even talking about the music at this early stage. Not one thing has been shot, and we're already talking about the music. So that will be for the next year. I'll be doing that, as well as projects for Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame. I'll do their next year's sports. And so we'll be doing films on 3 or 4 women in sports. So that's what's so exciting about my career,
Mm.
is that every day is different, and I constantly learn new things. I've done films on amateur boxing, and I've done films on Martin Luther King, and I've done films on education, and I've done films on trolleys and interviewed Annie Leibovitz and Jane Pauley. So every day is different. I mean, I'm sure that's the way you feel, and you feel like the luckiest person in the world that you get to talk to so many interesting people.
Yeah, the Jane Pauley and the Leibowitz was so good. It was so good. I watched them both, and I forgot about Jane Pauley. I really did, and yeah, it just caught me up, and those were excellent as well.
Oh, thank you.
If somebody was interested in creating a documentary, are you available to hire? How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so somebody just hired me to do a master class. Their son was in a gap year in college because of COVID, and I worked with the student for 3 months. I used to teach documentary making at Southern Connecticut State University
Hmm.
for full time for 2 years. But in general, just making documentaries. My website is carylevansproductions.com, and Carol is Karyl, carylevansproductions.com. And there's a place there that you can, shows you how you can get hold of me. And I just love collaborating. I love working on all kinds of projects, so that would be great.
Yeah, the website's great. It shows, certainly your awards, your press, which is very impressive, and all your films and your. By the way, Southern Connecticut's my alma mater. By the way, I'll just throw that
Oh,
in. I'll
that's
just
great.
I'll just throw that in. But
And I'll just throw in that Hilton Bewley was my uncle of Bewley Library, who was
uh,
president there for 19 years in the 60s. So we both have a little connection.
yeah, I spent a lot of time in Beulah. Maybe not enough.
Yeah.
I don't know. Some might say.
Yeah.
Some might say. Yeah. Uh, Karyl Evans, what a great pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. I can't wait to see what you have in store. Maybe we could do this again, and maybe eventually face to face.
That sounds great. And you are a wonderful interviewer. Thank you so much. You made this fantastic.
Thanks again. You be well, and good luck with you in the future.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources, and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.